she couldn't stop thinking about him. It didn't make sense. A few months ago, he was just there, an afterthought. Someone she barely noticed, someone who was always easy to ignore. He had been kind, polite, and dependable. Maybe too dependable. The kind of guy who always answered messages right away, always made plans work around her schedule, always seemed eager but unremarkable. And now? Now, she found herself staring at her phone, wondering if she should text him. No, why was she even thinking about him? It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was a need. She needed to understand what had changed. Because something had. The last time they had seen each other, it wasn't like before. He didn't act the way he used to. He didn't seem interested. No, worse. He seemed indifferent. Like she didn't matter. The way he looked at her was different. It wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either. It was as if he had figured something out. Something she wasn't in on. Something that made her uncomfortable in a way she had never felt before. She had been the one to ask him out that night, just as friends, of course. He had taken his time answering, something he never used to do. And when he finally did, it wasn't an enthusiastic yes, it was a simple, maybe, if I'm free. That wasn't like him. When they finally met, she noticed something immediately. The way he carried himself. The way he seemed unbothered. His words were slower, more deliberate. He wasn't filling the silence like he used to. And for the first time, she found herself wondering, what is he thinking? Before, she had always known. And now, she wasn't sure if she liked not knowing. At first, she had tried to test him, dropping hints, making playful remarks, even flirting just a little, just to see if he'd react the way he used to. But he didn't. He didn't bite. She had expected him to be excited, eager, the way he always was. But he wasn't. And that unsettled her. When she had mentioned another guy in passing, she had watched him closely. The old him would have reacted, maybe shown a hint of jealousy, maybe tried a little harder to get her attention. But instead, he had simply nodded and changed the subject. That was when she had felt it, an unfamiliar twinge of irritation. For the first time, she found herself wondering something she had never wondered before. Does he even like me anymore? That was when the shift happened. She should have felt relieved. After all, she had always thought of him as just a friend. She had never been interested, not really. And yet, when he excused himself early that night, with nothing more than a polite smile and a casual, "It was nice seeing you," she had felt something she had never felt before. A pang of regret. A feeling of being dismissed. For the first time, she wasn't the one leaving first. She wasn't the one controlling the situation. He was. That night, she had stared at her phone, expecting a message. Maybe just a simple "I had a great time." But there was nothing. The next day? Nothing. A week later? Still nothing. It was only then that she realized, he wasn't chasing anymore. And for reasons she couldn't explain, that made her want to chase him. She thought about texting, but what would she even say? She wanted to ask why he hadn't reached out, but that would seem too obvious. She wanted to act like she didn't care, but she did care, and that annoyed her even more. Why was she thinking about him so much? She told herself it was just curiosity. That was all. But if that was the case, why did it feel like she had lost something? Because deep down, she knew the truth. She hadn't changed. He had. And that changed everything. What happens next? We don't know yet. All we know is that something powerful has happened, something that makes people stop and think. A shift in energy, in perception, in control. This wasn't about playing games. This wasn't about tricks or manipulation. This was about something far deeper. A lesson every man needs to learn. The real question is, what changed? And more importantly, how can every man unlock this power? That's where the Real story begins. There was a time when he didn't understand. He didn't understand why women lost interest so quickly. Why he was always the one chasing. Why he could do everything right, be kind, be reliable, be thoughtful, and yet, still feel invisible. It wasn't like he was unattractive. He had his own style, kept himself in shape, and had a decent job. He wasn't the loudest guy in the room, but he wasn't the shyest either. But time and time again, he found himself in the same frustrating situation. At first, things would seem promising. A woman would seem interested, they would talk, maybe even go on a few dates. And he would do what he thought was the right thing. Text her good morning, ask about her day, always be available, always say yes to plans. And yet, every single time, the same pattern emerged. At first, she would seem happy. She would smile when she saw him, laugh at his jokes, seem comfortable around him. Then, slowly, things would shift. Her replies would take longer. The excitement in her voice would fade. Suddenly, she would be busy. She'd start canceling plans, not by saying no outright, but by saying things like, let's see, or maybe another time. And he knew what that meant. She wasn't interested anymore. The worst part? He never even knew why. He wasn't disrespectful. He wasn't rude. He wasn't a bad guy. So what was the problem? He thought about it constantly. He watched as other men, some less attractive, some less successful, some even rude or indifferent, seemed to command attention effortlessly. What did they have that he didn't? It wasn't that he wanted to play games. He wasn't trying to manipulate anyone. He just wanted to understand. Because after a while, it started to eat at him. Not just in dating, but in life. At work, he felt like he blended into the background. With friends, he was always the listener, never the one who set the tone. At social events, he felt like a supporting character in someone else's movie. He started wondering if this was just who he was. Maybe some people were meant to stand out, and others were meant to be forgettable. He didn't want to admit it, but it stung. Deep down, he wanted to be the guy that people remembered. The guy that people respected. The guy that women felt drawn to, not because he was chasing, but because they couldn't help themselves. But he had no idea how to become that man. And so, he kept repeating the same mistakes. The constant availability. The eagerness. The need for validation. The over-explaining. The apologizing for things that didn't even need an apology. The fear of saying no. He thought these things made him a good man. But in reality, they made him forgettable. Until one life-changing moment shattered everything he thought he knew. The moment everything changed, it wasn't some dramatic experience. No major heartbreak, no betrayal. It was just an ordinary night at a small cafe, where he overheard a conversation that would change him forever. He had been sitting alone, sipping his coffee, staring at his phone, scrolling through messages he thought about sending but never did. At the table next to him sat two older men, both in their late 50s, speaking in calm, measured voices. They weren't loud. They weren't trying to impress anyone. But there was something about them. Something powerful. One of them was telling a story, something about a woman he had once been with, someone who had left him but later regretted it. She came back? The other man asked. The storyteller smirked. Of course she did. The other man chuckled. And what did you do? The storyteller shrugged. Nothing. Nothing? That word hit him like a slap. The man continued. When you know your worth, you don't chase. You let them feel your absence. And if they don't, they were never worth it to begin with. That sentence echoed in his mind. He had spent years doing the opposite. Chasing. Over-explaining. Trying to prove his worth. And here was this man, sitting comfortably, talking about the exact opposite, about doing nothing, about letting people come to him. It went against everything he had ever believed. And yet, something about it felt right. Powerful. Unshakable. He didn't even realize he had been staring until the older man turned to him and smiled. "Something on your mind, son?" He hesitated. Then, for reasons he couldn't explain, he asked the question that had haunted him for years. "How do you become a man who doesn't chase?" The older man studied him for a moment before leaning back in his chair. "Simple," he said. "You stop trying to be liked. You stop trying to prove yourself. You focus on your life, not on what anyone else thinks of you. The moment you stop chasing, people start noticing." "But, won't they forget about you?" he asked. The older man smiled. "Only the ones who were never meant to remember you in the first place." Those words struck deep. Because he knew, in that moment, that this was the answer he had been looking for all along. Everything he had done in the past, seeking approval, being overly available, trying to be liked, had been weakness disguised as kindness. And the truth was simple. People don't respect weakness. They respect certainty. That night, as he walked home, something inside him had shifted. For the first time, he didn't feel the need to check his phone. He didn't feel the need to reach out to people who didn't prioritize him. He didn't feel the need to prove himself. Because for the first time, he knew his worth. And that changed everything. What happens next? Now that he understands what he's been doing wrong, he's about to embark on a journey of transformation. But change isn't easy. In part 3, he begins applying these lessons. At first, it feels unnatural. But soon, people, especially women, start reacting to him differently. The man he used to be is fading away. And the man he's becoming? He's about to find out just how powerful that transformation really is. At first, it felt unnatural. The idea of not chasing, of not explaining himself, of not constantly proving his worth, it went against everything he had ever known. For years, he had thought that effort equaled results. If he liked someone, he needed to show it. If he wanted people to respect him, he needed to be agreeable. If he wanted to be remembered, he needed to make himself seen. But that night at the cafe, the words of the older man had planted a seed of doubt in everything he had believed. You stop trying to be liked. You stop trying to prove yourself. The moment you stop chasing, people start noticing. It sounded too simple. Too easy. But maybe, that was the point. So, he decided to test it. Just once. He started small. The first thing he did? He stopped reaching out first. Not just to women, but to everyone. No more texting just to keep conversations going. No more over-explaining his plans, his thoughts, his decisions. No more checking in to make sure people still wanted him around. If someone wanted to talk to him, they would reach out. If they didn't, then maybe they were never as invested as he had thought. At first, it felt wrong. He had spent years believing that relationships, whether friendships, family, or dating, required constant effort. And now, he was just waiting. But then something strange happened. People did start reaching out. Not everyone, but the ones who mattered. And the first time a woman texted him first, something clicked. It wasn't that he had become more attractive overnight. It was the absence of neediness. That desperate energy, the subtle, unspoken pressure to be noticed, to be liked, to be validated, was gone. And in its place? Curiosity. The test that changed everything. One night, he was invited to a small gathering by a friend. A few months ago, he would have jumped at the opportunity, excited, eager, making sure to be extra engaging, extra available, extra likable. But not this time. This time, he didn't rush to say yes. Instead, he casually said, maybe. If I'm free. And the moment he said it, he saw the shift. The reaction wasn't annoyance. It was interest. Because for the first time, he wasn't predictable. He wasn't desperate to be included. He wasn't chasing. And that made people wonder. When he finally showed up, without making a big deal about it, he noticed something else. People were drawn to him. Not because he was the loudest. Not because he was the funniest. But because he carried himself differently. He didn't try to dominate conversations. He didn't try to impress. He simply was. And the less effort he put into being noticed, the more people noticed him. The shift in her eyes then came the real test. A woman at the gathering, someone he had once tried, and failed, to impress months ago, was there. Back then, she had been polite but distant. She had given him those half-hearted responses, the kind that let him know she wasn't really engaged. And before, he would have tried harder. He would have worked to keep her attention, made sure to be the guy she couldn't ignore. But now? Now, he didn't care. And that was when something unexpected happened. She approached him. At first, it was casual. A simple, "Hey, I haven't seen you in a while. What have you been up to?" Nothing dramatic. Nothing flirtatious. But in her eyes, he could see it, the shift. She was looking at him differently. Curious. As if she was trying to figure out why he felt different. And when he simply smiled, nodded, and answered without trying to keep the conversation going, she noticed, because suddenly, she was the one putting in the effort. Before, he would have been the one asking questions, keeping her engaged, making sure the conversation flowed. But now? Now, he answered simply. Confidently. And then he let silence do the rest. That was when he saw it. The lean in. That subtle, unconscious shift in body language when someone is invested. And it wasn't because he was playing games. It was because, for the first time, he was radiating something he had never radiated before. Self-sufficiency. He didn't need anything from her. And that made her want to give it. The unspoken power of walking away by the end of the night, she was the one lingering. She was the one making sure he was still engaged. And when he finally excused himself and left, not abruptly, not dramatically, just, naturally, she looked almost surprised. Because she wasn't used to it. She wasn't used to being the one who had to wonder. To question. To chase. And the moment he walked away, something happened that he had never experienced before. She watched him leave. Not in the dismissive way she had before. Not in the way that said, "Oh well, just another guy." But in the way that said, "Wait, what just happened?" And that was when he knew. The shift was real. What happens next? The lesson was clear. It wasn't about tricks. It wasn't about manipulation. It was about energy. About certainty. He had spent his entire life trying to be chosen. Trying to make people like him. Trying to prove that he was enough. And the moment he stopped trying? The moment he focused on himself instead of on others? Everything changed. Now, the real transformation was about to begin. Because he had only just scratched the surface. The real test was coming next. At first, it felt unnatural. For years, he had been the guy who filled every silence, answered every message immediately, and made sure no one ever doubted his interest. Now, he was doing the opposite, holding back, slowing down, letting the world come to him instead of constantly reaching out. And it wasn't easy. There were moments when he felt the pull to go back to his old ways, to send that extra text, to over-explain why he couldn't make it, to seek reassurance that people still wanted him around. But every time he felt that urge, he reminded himself of what he had learned. The moment you stop chasing, people start noticing. So he let the silence stretch. He let himself be. And that was when he first noticed it, the shift in the way the world reacted to him. The first real test. One evening, he found himself at a casual gathering, surrounded by familiar faces. Among them was a woman he had once tried to impress, a woman who, months ago, barely acknowledged his presence. Back then, she had been polite but distant. She had laughed at his jokes but never engaged in a way that made him feel like he truly mattered. And before, he would have tried harder. He would have looked for a way to spark her interest, to keep the conversation going, to make himself seen. But now? Now, he didn't care. He didn't ignore her, but he didn't go out of his way to get her attention either. Instead, he focused on himself. He talked with people he genuinely wanted to talk to. He took his time, moved with intention, and didn't force anything. He wasn't trying to be liked. He was just being. And then, something unexpected happened. She noticed. At first, it was subtle. A few stolen glances. A slight tilt of her head when he spoke. The way she suddenly seemed to position herself near him in the group. But the biggest sign? She was curious. For the first time, she was asking him questions. Not surface-level small talk, but real questions, about his interests, his thoughts, his plans. It was as if she was trying to figure something out. As if she was wondering, what changed? The power of silence. The old him would have taken this as a sign to push forward. To capitalize on her interest. To make sure he didn't lose momentum. But now, he understood something most men never do. Sometimes, the most powerful move is to do nothing. So when she leaned in and asked, "You seem different lately. What's changed?" He didn't launch into an explanation. He didn't tell her about the lessons he had learned, the books he had read, or the conversations that had shifted his mindset. He just shrugged and said, "I guess I just stopped worrying about things that don't matter." And then he let the silence sit. And that silence? It did something words never could. Because in that moment, she wasn't just hearing him. She was feeling him. She was feeling his presence, his certainty, his self-sufficiency. She was feeling something that most men never made her feel. And that's what made her want more. The power of saying no. His transformation wasn't just about how he carried himself in conversations. It was about something deeper. It was about what he was willing to tolerate. One night, a friend invited him out. Before, he would have said yes immediately, eager to be included. But this time, he paused. He didn't want to go, not because he had better plans, but because he simply didn't feel like it. And for the first time, he didn't make an excuse. He just said, "No, I think I'll sit this one out." That was it. No over-explaining. No softening the blow. Just a simple, confident no. And the reaction? His friend respected it. Because people respect a man who values his own time. And women? They feel it. A man who can say no, who doesn't need to explain himself, who isn't seeking approval, that is a man who is unforgettable. The woman who couldn't ignore him anymore. Then, it happened. The woman who had once ignored him. The one he had once tried so hard to impress, texted him. She didn't just send a casual message. She reached out with something thoughtful. Something intentional. And for the first time, he didn't answer right away. Not because he was playing games. But because he was busy living his life. Busy doing the things that mattered to him. And when he finally did respond, he kept it short. No extra effort. No over-explaining. And the moment he hit send, he smiled. Because he felt the shift. She was the one putting in effort now. She was the one feeling the absence of his attention. She was the one wondering why he felt different. And that feeling? That was power. What happens next? The world had started treating him differently. Not because he changed his appearance. Not because he had more money. But because he changed his energy. And now? Now, he was about to learn the most important lesson of all. That being unforgettable was never about them. It was always about him. She wasn't used to feeling this way. For so long, she had been the one in control, the one who decided how things played out. She had been the one who received messages, not the one who waited for them. The one who let men chase her, not the one wondering if she should reach out. But now? Now, she found herself thinking about him more than she wanted to admit. It wasn't that she was in love with him. It wasn't even that she suddenly wanted to be with him. It was something deeper. Something unsettling. She needed to understand what had changed. Because the last time she saw him, he was different. Not in a loud, obvious way. Not in the way most men tried to get attention, with flashy gestures, with over-the-top confidence, with desperate attempts to stand out. No, it was something else. Something subtle. Something powerful. He wasn't seeking her approval anymore. He wasn't trying to impress her. He wasn't reacting the way she expected him to. And that made her want to know why. The moment it clicked, it started with small things. A week passed after they had last seen each other. Normally, he would have sent her a message by now, something casual, something playful, something that let her know he was still interested. But this time? Nothing. She told herself she didn't care. She told herself it didn't matter. But then, one night, as she was scrolling through her phone, she caught herself doing something she never thought she'd do. She checked his profile. Not just glanced at it, studied it. What had he been up to? Had he posted anything new? Was he talking to someone else? And that was when it hit her. She was thinking about him, more than she wanted to. More than she ever had before. And it wasn't because he had done something to make her feel this way. It was because he had stopped doing anything at all. He had removed himself from the chase. And in doing so, he had flipped everything upside down. Testing the waters, she decided to reach out. Just something simple, nothing too obvious. Hey, long time no see. What have you been up to? She sent the message and waited. Before, he would have responded right away. He would have been eager, excited, grateful for the opportunity to keep the conversation going. But this time? An hour passed. Then 2. Then 3. Still no response. And she hated how much that bothered her. Why was she even thinking about this? Why did she care? She told herself he was probably just busy. But then, she saw it. He was online. He had seen the message. And he hadn't replied. That was when she felt it, something unfamiliar, something she had never associated with him before. A pang of insecurity. Because suddenly, she wasn't sure anymore. Suddenly, she was the one waiting. Suddenly, she was the one overthinking. The unexpected response when he finally responded, it wasn't what she expected. It wasn't overly enthusiastic. It wasn't an apology for the delay. It wasn't a long explanation or an attempt to keep her engaged. It was simple. Hey, yeah, been keeping busy. Hope you're doing well. That was it. No question. No invitation to keep the conversation going. Just a calm, indifferent response. And that shook her. Because this wasn't the guy she used to know. The guy who once waited on her every word. The guy who always made sure she knew he was interested. This was someone else. And for the first time, she wasn't sure where she stood with him. For the first time, she wasn't sure if he even cared anymore. The power shift. A few days later, they ended up at the same event. Before, she might have ignored him at first, played it cool, acted as if she hadn't even noticed him. But now? Now, she wanted his attention. She wanted to see if she could still make him react the way he used to. So she approached him. Not directly, of course. She made sure to be in his line of sight, made sure to be near him in conversation. She even laughed a little louder, just to see if he would turn his head. But he didn't. He was relaxed, engaged in his own conversation, completely unaffected by her presence. And that drove her crazy. She found herself wondering, was he ignoring me on purpose? Was he really not interested anymore? Had he found someone else? And before she even realized what she was doing, she stepped closer. "Hey," she said, acting casual. "I feel like I haven't seen you in forever." He turned to her and smiled. Not a big smile. Not an eager smile. Just calm. Like he had nothing to prove. Like he wasn't impressed just because she was there. And that? That made her feel something she never expected. Attraction. Not because he was trying. But because he wasn't trying at all. What happens next? For the first time, the roles have reversed. She is the one chasing. She is the one thinking about him. She is the one feeling uncertainty. And now, he is about to learn the final lesson. That being unforgettable was never about her. It was always about him. For the first time in his life, he understood something most men never do. It had never been about her. Not this woman. Not any woman. Not anyone else's approval. For so long, he had believed that attraction was something to be earned. That if he just said the right things, acted the right way, and proved himself enough, people, especially women, would notice. But now, standing there, watching as she leaned in, trying to pull his attention, he realized the truth. It wasn't about making her want him. It was about becoming the kind of man who didn't need anyone's validation in the first place. The power of walking away. Not long ago, if she had given him this much attention, he would have seen it as a sign to push forward, to do more, to keep her engaged, to make sure he didn't lose the opportunity. But now? Now, he didn't feel the need to do anything at all. He wasn't trying to win her over. He wasn't trying to impress her. Because for the first time, he wasn't trying at all. He was simply living his life. And that was what made him irresistible. The shift in her eyes, he could see it in her expression, the curiosity, the uncertainty, the quiet frustration. She wasn't used to this. She was used to being the one who set the pace, the one who had men eagerly proving themselves, trying to earn her attention. But this man, the one standing in front of her now, was different. He wasn't reacting the way she expected. He wasn't jumping at the opportunity to prove himself. And because of that, he felt different. Different from all the other guys who had tried to impress her. Different from all the men who had followed the script of being nice and showing effort, while unknowingly repelling her in the process. This time, she was the one feeling uncertain. And that uncertainty? It was the strongest attraction she had ever felt. The new energy he carried, it wasn't about being rude. It wasn't about playing games or acting cold. It was about certainty. He was calm. Relaxed. Comfortable in his own skin. And that energy, that quiet, unshakable confidence, was magnetic. Because deep down, every woman could sense it. The difference between a man who needed her approval and a man who was completely fine with or without it. And that kind of man? That's the man people remember. Testing the truth over the next few weeks, he kept noticing the same thing. Not just with her, but with everyone. Conversations felt different. People listened to him more. Women seemed to engage more. Not because he was trying to be interesting, but because he had stopped trying entirely. And the best part? He wasn't doing it for them. He was doing it for himself, the secret most men never learn. One day, he found himself back at that same cafe. The place where he had first overheard the older man's conversation. And as he sat there, thinking about everything that had changed, he spotted that same man again, sitting at his usual table, sipping his coffee. This time, he didn't hesitate. He walked over. The older man looked up, smirked slightly, and nodded. "Ah. You figured it out, didn't you?" He smiled. "Yeah. I think I did." The older man leaned back. "Go on, then. What's the truth?" He didn't need to think about his answer. "It was never about her," he said. "It was always about me." The older man chuckled, nodding. Most men go their whole lives without learning that. He thought back to the man he used to be, the one who over-explained, overcompensated, overthought. And then, he thought about the man he was now. The man who knew his worth. The man who didn't need to chase. And for the first time, he felt something he had never felt before. Unshakable. Whole. Complete. And that? That was the real secret. He didn't change overnight. The transformation wasn't about learning a new technique or following some secret formula. It wasn't about playing games or acting like someone he wasn't. It was about mindset. A fundamental shift in how he viewed himself, and the world. Because the truth was, being unforgettable was never about doing more. It was about being more. Not for anyone else. For himself. The moment he knew he was different, he found himself in a familiar situation, a social gathering, surrounded by people, some old friends, some new acquaintances. Before, he would have overthought everything, how to stand out, how to make people like him, how to ensure he wasn't forgotten by the end of the night. But now? Now, he was just there. Present. Not seeking attention. Not forcing conversations. Not worrying about how he was being perceived. And something interesting happened. People gravitated toward him. Not because he was the loudest. Not because he was showing off. But because he was carrying something most men never do. Certainty. She noticed, but it didn't matter anymore then, he saw her. The woman who had once overlooked him. The woman who had once treated him like just another guy. The woman who, not long ago, had started chasing him after realizing he was no longer chasing her. Before, he would have felt nervous. He would have wondered what to say, how to act, how to ensure she stayed interested. But now? Now, he didn't need to do anything. He simply existed. And he could feel it, the way she watched him, the way she found small excuses to be near him, the way she was now the one seeking his attention. It was ironic, really. The moment he stopped needing her validation was the moment she started craving it. But here's the thing, it didn't matter anymore. Because this whole time, it had never been about her. It had always been about him. And in that moment, he realized, she could stay. She could go. Either way, he would be fine. Because he wasn't chasing anymore. Not her. Not anyone. Not even life itself. The power of true confidence. Confidence isn't about what you say. It's not about acting a certain way. It's about knowing who you are, and refusing to need anything from anyone. That's what people feel. That's what makes someone magnetic. It's not something you turn on or off. It's a way of being. A deep, unshakable belief in your own worth. And when a man carries himself with that kind of quiet certainty, the world reacts. Women notice. Opportunities appear. Life moves differently. Not because he's trying to be unforgettable. But because he already is. The final lesson: he left the gathering that night, walking alone under the streetlights, feeling something he had never felt before. Not excitement. Not validation. Something stronger. Peace. He was done chasing. Because now he understood. The secret wasn't about making her want him. It was about becoming a man who doesn't need to be wanted in the first place. And that? That is what makes a man truly unforgettable.